Hi everyone, and welcome to our last part of the chemistry topic. So topic 4, part 4, lecture 1. So here are our overarching learning outcomes that I told you about before, and remember that these are your learning objectives which you will be assessed on. So, topic 4, part 4, lecture 1. Okay, so what we're going to be looking at in this little lecture is we're going to be looking at organic compounds. Now, these organic compounds are very, very large molecules. And the reason why we need to learn about biological molecules is because if we remember back, atoms make molecules and molecules make cells and cells make tissues and tissues make organs and organs make organ systems. And then the last part is organ systems make organisms. Okay, so it's important to learn about these biological molecules. Okay, now we are going to learn about organic compounds. Okay, organic compounds, organic molecules, and there are 4 different kinds of primary categories of organic molecules. Now, what makes a molecule organic is the presence of carbon. So, if you come across a molecule and it has carbon in it, it is called organic. It's an organic molecule. Okay? So that is the definition. So we're going to look at all 4 of these. For 165, we're going to be doing carbohydrates, lipids and proteins. And then in 175, we're going to look at nucleic acids. So you don't need to worry about those ones and nucleotides just yet. All right, so carbon. The good thing about carbon is that the carbon atom, you can use it to make lots and lots of stuff from it. Okay, you can make different shapes. Look, you can even make a ring if you wanted to out of carbon. Okay, and carbon is at the backbone of a lot of the molecules that make up a human body. And I guess you just need to be aware of this, but not necessarily be stringent to remember it, is that carbon backbones contain other things. So other things called functional groups. And usually I will point them out to you when we come across those. Okay, so we know that carbon has 4 valence electrons, which means that it only has 4 electrons in its outermost shell. Okay, so what it wants to do, it wants to get together with another atom so it fills its shell. Okay, remember how atoms don't like to have their shells not full to the max? It makes them uncomfortable. Okay, so let's have a look at carbohydrates. Okay, now carbohydrates are made up of 3 atoms: carbon, hydrogen and oxygen. So these are straight out of a periodic table. Can you see the symbol for carbon, hydrogen and oxygen? The name? What about this? That was the atomic number, remember? And the atomic number represents the number of protons present in the nucleus of that atom. And remember this number? That number is the atomic mass. Now, do you remember the definition of what the atomic mass was? The atomic mass is the number of protons plus the number of neutrons. Okay? So just a little bit of a revision there. Okay, so let's have a look at glucose. Glucose is a carbohydrate. So glucose is an example of a carbohydrate. And glucose is the main sugar that is found in your blood. Okay? So you get glucose from food and your body runs on glucose. Glucose is your body's preferred energy source. Okay? So when we eat sugary things, glucose goes into our blood, and then from there glucose travels around, and the cells that need glucose, they just grab it from your blood. So let's have a look and see. Glucose has 6 carbons. One molecule of glucose is made up of 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens. Okay, can you see there? Here is our carbon backbone. Look, and these are all our other components of glucose. Let's have a look at another example of a carbohydrate. Sucrose. Sucrose is the main ingredient in white sugar. You get it from plants. But the good thing about sucrose is that we can break it down into its parts. So sucrose is just a glucose molecule joined to a fructose molecule. Easy peasy, okay? So when we get sucrose, we split it up and we use glucose for energy, all right? And later on when we talk about cells, we will learn about exactly how our cells do that, okay? And look at the chemical formula for sucrose. We're not going to ask you to remember these, highly complicated three-dimensional drawings. What we want you to remember, though, is that sucrose is just glucose plus fructose. Let's have a look at another example of a carbohydrate. This time we're looking at glycogen. Look at glycogen. This is a glucose molecule. Look at glycogen. Glycogen is just a whole bunch of glucose molecules stuck together. Okay? And so we store glucose in the form of glycogen. And that happens in our liver. So when we have too much glucose floating around, we actually put some into our liver in this way, in this form, so we can store it in case we need it for later. Okay? Look at that. It's huge. Look at glycogen. Yeah? Now, let's have a look at what it means to be a simple or a complex carbohydrate. The distinction between these two, it really has to do with the structure of the molecule. So simple carbohydrates have a simple structure, whereas a complex carbohydrate is made up of really, really complicated chains. They go all different directions. That's pretty much the main difference. Yeah? And so for you to be able to use this glucose, it's going to take you a lot longer to break it down than this one, than if you eat some chips from Macca's. Okay, that one goes straight into your blood. This one takes time and goes into your blood gradually. So make sure you eat healthy complex carbohydrates and don't go and have donuts. Okay, This is exactly what I was talking to you about. Look at this. Simple carbohydrates, woof, straight up. And look at the complex. Oh, that's much, much better. Okay, much, much better. So it's about whether a carbohydrate is simple or complex has a big, big effect on the glucose in your blood. Okay, and so this knowledge has ramifications for when you learn about the management of diabetes. Okay, so make sure you remember that. It's important. Okay, got a little recap activity for you to fill out. If you don't have this slide, please just pause the video and just do a very quick write down the answers. So organic compounds contain carbon, okay. Carbohydrates are made up of carbon, hydrogen and oxygen atoms. And then we looked at 3 different kinds of carbohydrates. So, happy days. What I want to look at now is lipids, or are lipids. So, lipids are also organic compounds, okay? This is how we get lipids into our bodies. But what we're going to look at are the 3 most important lipids, okay? We're going to look at triglycerides, phospholipids, and steroids. Now, how handy is it? Lipids are made up of the exact same atoms as a carbohydrate is. Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Super, super handy building blocks. Let's have a look at triglycerides. We can get triglycerides from our diet, or we can actually make them ourselves as well. The whole point of triglycerides is to store energy, okay? We store energy. That's fat, okay? Triglycerides is fat. Now, what happens if, for example, your body cannot use glucose? So we can't make our energy from glucose. Your body is going to find something else to use, okay? Our bodies love glucose. That is the go-to energy source, but they will find something else if glucose is not available. So if there's no glucose there, we go to triglycerides. Now, when you are using triglycerides as your energy, what happens is that your body makes something called ketones, okay? Because your brain runs on glucose, and if it doesn't have glucose, it's going to have to use something else. So, it uses triglycerides and it makes ketones. Now, you can tell if someone is using only triglycerides for their energy because their breath smells like acetone, okay? And that is part of the chemical reactions involved in that, okay? So if you have someone whose breath smells a little bit like sweet alcohol, that means that that person is not using glucose for energy. They're using something else. They're using triglycerides. So that's a really big hint, okay? And it's all about chemistry, isn't it? That's why chemistry is so important to learn about. Okay, so triglycerides are made up of 2 things. I'm sure swap these around, but anyway, a triglyceride is just a fatty acid plus glycerol. We don't want you to remember the chemical formula or the structure, you know, with all the letters in there. Just this is the level that we want you to remember. All right, now this is our second kind of lipid that we're going to be looking at. This one is called the phospholipid, and it's super important, okay, because the phospholipid makes our plasma membrane. So our phospholipid makes the encasing for our cells. Super important. Can you have a look at the phospholipid here? Look how cute it is. It's got a head and two little legs, and one leg is sort of cocked to the side, okay? So what you need to understand that it's got two different structures. It's got the hydrophilic head. Do you remember what hydrophilic was? Hydrophilic meant water what? And hydrophobic tails. What is hydrophobic? Do you remember what hydrophobic meant? So when you chuck a whole bunch of phospholipids into a watery environment, this is how they arrange themselves. Isn't that the cutest thing? And that makes a phospholipid bilayer, which means double layer. Phospholipids are ultra important. Okay, so we saw the two types of lipids. Now this is our third type. This is going to be steroids. Okay, steroids. Again, cholesterol is a type of steroid. Okay, so the reason why cholesterol, a little bit of cholesterol is good, okay, is because here is our plasma membrane here. Can you see how there's little bits of cholesterol in there? So cholesterol keeps our plasma membrane kind of stable, okay? So that's why we need cholesterol. It helps keeping that plasma membrane shape, keeping it together, helps the phospholipids from not losing the shape of the plasma membrane. That's why cholesterol is important. We get it from these sources, and our liver also makes it. Okay, so just for you, you need to understand that cholesterol is a type of steroid, and that, that's its job. It's try to keep our plasma membrane stable and at the correct shape. Okay, little bit of a recap. Lipids made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And we had a look at 3 examples. We looked at triglycerides, we looked at phospholipids, and we also looked at cholesterol. Yay!